kind of want to challenge the premise of the question a little bit. I think the hollowness of those institutions and their failures is already manifest. I mean, if the Iraq War wasn't enough, the financial crisis and the fact that none of the experts saw it coming, right? I mean, all of these failures, and then, the way that, look, what Donald Trump did vis-a-vis Russia was not acceptable, not okay, the way the campaign opened themselves up for that help. But we were all led to believe night after night we were going to get the P tape. I mean, this was way further. I think the conspiracy theorizing that just gripped every single cable news network and every mainstream institution has just exposed the hollowness and the transparency of their agenda. And it really resonated what Megan said earlier about how she's sort of dismissed sometimes because she's upfront about the lens that she views and the ideology that she views her politics. And obviously I get the same thing, but gosh, I would prefer that to someone who pretends to be like, oh, I'm just calling balls and strikes here. But when Bernie Sanders accurately cited academic research, actually he gets 3 Pinocchios for that. I mean, the ideology has become so obvious. You can see it. Look, in our politics, who did the New York Times endorse? Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. How has it helped them in the polls? Not very much. So I don't think that this, I think the problem is more what comes next, right? There is already only a thin slice of America that even cares what the mainstream media is saying, is even fixate on it, trusts them at all. It's only a thin slice that's left, and it's the audience they're catering to, right? This is a capitalist business. Their audience, their consumer that they want are basically mostly affluent white liberals. That's their audience. That's who the advertisers want. That's who all the coverage is for. And so if you're outside of that audience, you already see the hollowness and the ideology of what they're doing. I think the more challenging question is what comes next. In some ways, the media, by coming up with a variety of excuses for Hillary Clinton's loss, some of them grounded in certain pieces of fact, but they've avoided having to do any real diagnosis of their own failings, and this goes for the Democratic establishment as well. They would rather talk about Russia, they'd rather talk about Comey, they'd rather talk about sexism, all real things, but also great ways to avoid having to talk about the absolute failings of neoliberalism over 30 years, right? So in some ways, I think either the mainstream has to sort of hit rock bottom and actually do some sort of soul searching, which I am not very optimistic is going to happen. I mean, we see them all out with their bad takes again, saying, so certain after they certainly predicted that Trump was going to lose, and before that certainly predicted Barack Obama couldn't get elected, and all those things. They're back out with their bad takes, having done zero self-reflection. So I think it is going to be the alternative that becomes the mainstream. I mean, we talk about it on Rising all the time. You look at the numbers, 70% of America has a boiling anger at the political establishment, right? We are not the minority. We are the majority. The overwhelming majority says we're done with these people. 40% of Americans say when they think about our political institutions, they want to just burn them all down, okay? That's where we are. So the alternative, the so-called alternative, is actually the mainstream view. So to me, that is the future, is these voices becoming larger and more influential. And you see it happening before our very eyes. And those legacy voices being marginalized and increasingly seen for the ideologues who have been wrong about everything consistently for what they are.